Welcome back. I'm David the Good, the inventor of the most original gardening system ever to have been invented by anyone in the history of the planet. There is nothing like it. I call it grocery row gardening, and it's astounding, and it will change your life. One of the great things about the grocery row gardening system is your ability to grow perennials, such as trees, small trees and shrubs and edibles and herbs and things that come back year after year, but you're able to mix that in with some annuals because we keep these things under control and we organize it as a small orchard using backyard orchard culture principles, permaculture principles, stuff we blatantly ripped off from Stefan Subkowiak to allow us to have a maximum food production on a backyard scale. And one of the great things about it is that anytime a gap opens up in the system, you can just plug something into it. And if you are concentrating on some of those fast yielding annuals while your perennials are getting bigger, you can just look for gaps and chop into it and throw new annuals in anytime you want to. So right now, we are adding kohlrabi to the system. I like kohlrabi. My wife likes kohlrabi. We had about 4 or 5 different varieties of kohlrabi in packages. So we just ripped all the packages open and mixed the seeds together. And I sprinkled them across our little 4-foot by 4-foot transplant bed. This little transplant bed is something that we built a few months ago. And it's just a 4-foot by 4-foot, like just a little raised bed garden. And that little raised bed is a nursery space for transplants that we will later put out into the grocery row gardens or elsewhere. Anytime we have a gap in our victory gardens or in the grocery row gardens or in our landscaping, it doesn't matter. We can just go in there and pull some transplants out and put them in there. And one of the benefits of having a spot like this where you can start transplants is that you can test seeds for viability. You're not really sure if this packet is too old or this one that you found in the bottom of the fridge, or you don't even know what it is. You can just sprinkle it on, and whatever comes up, if it looks good, you can transplant the ones that look good, and if some of them don't come up, it doesn't matter. You haven't dedicated, say a 40-foot row to something that you're not sure is going to come up. And this works really, really well with brassicas because the brassicas transplant easily. It wouldn't work so well if you were doing something like melons or beans. I would just plant them in the rows and hope for the best. But with brassicas, that is your broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, kohlrabi, and plants that don't make a big root, those are excellent for transplanting and they do well. So if I have gaps, I can put it in there. So in the grocery row gardens, we've got our grocery row garden main plants planted, but almost all of them are plants that are going to produce in spring and summer. They're mostly asleep right now. We have an almost asleep goji berry. We have some Rosa rugosa that'll make rose hips for us that's just barely awake. We have a lot of sleeping mulberries and sleeping stone fruit and sleeping figs, but we can still get yields out of there because here in zone 8B we have mild winters. So we can grow winter greens through the winter, and we can grow things like kohlrabi and cabbages. And so we can keep that little 4-foot by 4-foot in this season growing with little plants that we'll transplant out there. So we're getting the quick yields of annual plants in a time where we're not getting anything at all from our perennials. Then as the perennials start to wake up and grow in the summer, we can be harvesting these guys and then putting in the warm season stuff. We'll probably just chop these kohlrabi out if they survive. I mean, sometimes you get really cold frosts and things don't survive. So there's always risk involved with gardening. But if we get them, assuming they all survive into February, March, April, we might still be harvesting them because when it's cold, they grow slowly. So it's not like it's gonna just grow in 60 days necessarily and produce like we would like. Sometimes they sit there and they're small and they're small and they're small and they're small until they get a few weeks of warmer weather and then they really take off. So we can put them in there now, harvest them out in the spring, and then probably just direct seed in whatever we want to. If we want to put an underlayment of watermelons or if we want to put in some beans, we put those in for the summer. Then when it gets to fall, we can put it in again. But by having transplants just ready to go at any point, when a gap comes in, we can fill it. And it's really easy to just drop transplants in, particularly when you're dealing with mulched areas. In the grocery row gardens right now, we have a lot of weed cover. So there's a lot of henbit that's filled the area in. And I don't really mind henbit. It's not particularly annoying, and it's also edible and it's nutritious. So we can chop the henbit out and use it to scramble with our eggs in the morning for breakfast, and we can throw it in soup and that sort of thing. And it's not really taking up space or invading anything that I'm worried about right now. As a matter of fact, it's adding extra sugars to the ground and pumping sugars in, so that henbit is acting like a cover crop for me through the winter. But I want to plant some kohlrabi too. So all we do to do that is I just go through with my machete and prune that henbit down to the ground and chop it up, so the roots and the leaves are rotting into the ground, feeding the ground. Those sugars on the roots are feeding the ground, and now as they rot, they'll become more organic matter, and then we just plug in our transplants. Just go and yank out a section of transplants from the transplant bed, and then break them up into pieces and carefully plant them in. And then I like to put a little bit of mulch around them just to keep the weeds from coming back, to give them a little bit of running space, to give them a little bit of protection for their roots from the cold, from the pounding rain, to give a little bit more feed to the soil. I've just got some rotten grass clippings that my daughter raked up and put to one side. And those little nests around them will help protect them. And then all we do is water them in. When I transplant, I like to water in my transplants with a mild fertilizer solution. So the mild fertilizer solution I'm using is rainwater with a little bit of worm tea in it from our worm bin, our bathtub worm bin, which is still doing excellently, and a little bit of whey left over from cheese making. And that together, I'm giving a little bit of protein, I'm giving a little bit of minerals, and I'm giving it some beneficial fungi and bacteria. I'm giving it a little kick past those roots that have just been disturbed so they can absorb what they can, and hopefully it will help them recover and grow better. I believe that if you give them just a little bit extra when you transplant them, a little perk, and I make sure I water the leaves too because they can absorb some through it, they'll do better and they'll grow out. So if you have a grocery row garden system, or if you're going wider, if you have a big orchard, think about all that extra light that is coming in through the seasons. You might not be able to do this in winter like we can because we have such a mild climate, but you might be able to do this in summer and in spring and in fall, in whatever your climate is, just by thinking what would grow at this time of year that could fill those gaps where there's light coming in between trees that are not in full and active growth. A lot of things don't need a full day's sunlight either. And before things wake up in the spring, if you can get some cold tolerant plants out, they could take advantage of that extra light. Sometimes in the middle of summer when it's really, really bright and hot and sunny, they'll still get enough light and you can grow some summer crops underneath your orchard plants. And then as it gets to the end of the year, you can get back into growing cool season stuff. But you don't have to just sit there and wait for a fruit tree 4 or 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to produce. When it's young, you've got tons of space. You could use watermelons and pumpkins as ground covers. You could put bunching onions underneath the tree. You can have one tree in your front yard. Say you got a little fig tree that you planted. Go ahead and plant herbs around the base of it. You've got a few years before that tree fills out so much that you can't grow there. And by then you've got plenty of harvests. And you've got some quick stuff out of the ground. Just something to think about. I really enjoy the grocery row gardening system because it can kind of grow and change with the seasons, and it's more like a series of forest edges with the benefits of long-term perennials that are not going to die easily on me, that could last for years, with the quick, fast, heavy production of annuals all in the same system. Right now we're really heavy on annual production. In a few years we'll be more heavy on perennial production. But we've got food within 30 days of planting the system. There's food coming out of it. And I think that that is a huge benefit, particularly when you're talking about survival gardening and having not the fragility of relying on trucks from 1,000 miles away. You know, a few packets of seeds and some fruit trees in the ground in your backyard are some cheap peace of mind. Yeah. If you want to learn more about the system, it's called Grocery Row Gardening. There's a little booklet that I wrote on it because people kept saying, how are you planting these gardens and how did you do this? So I explain exactly how I do it, and I will put a link to the booklet below. And a lot of you have been sending in your pictures of grocery row gardens and sharing your experiments in different climates, and I absolutely love it. It's going to change. Your plants are going to change. I think the overall system is sound, and just your creativity has to fill in the gaps, and that's what we're doing week to week, month to month, and it's great to see what you all are doing too. Thanks for joining me. Catch you all next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be green.